You asked why Bernie lied. What if the better question was never asked? Before billions of dollars disappeared, before Wall Street collapsed into panic, before the FBI, before the SEC, before the headlines. Netflix quietly handed us a frame. Madoff, the monster of Wall Street. Monster, one word. Before a single piece of evidence is presented, before a single witness is interviewed, before Bernie Madoff ever speaks, we already know who we're supposed to be looking at. That's interesting, because detectives know something. The first question isn't always the best question. Sometimes the frame is the first clue. Netflix's 4-part documentary, Madoff, the Monster of Wall Street, traces the rise and fall of financier Bernie Madoff, the architect of what has been called the largest Ponzi scheme in Wall Street history. Across 4 episodes, investigators, journalists, former employees, investors, and archival footage reconstruct how one of the most respected names on Wall Street became one of its most infamous. It's a compelling story. I just don't think it's the best question. Because somewhere inside these 4 episodes, another question is hiding in plain sight. And once I saw it, I couldn't unsee it. What if the better question was never asked? Episode 1 is called A Liar, Not a Failure. It opens with a young Bernie Madoff building a legitimate market-making business while quietly managing investments for family, friends, and referrals. His reputation grows. His returns appear extraordinary. People begin telling other people. Trust compounds faster than money. Then the market turns. The speculative investments collapse. The clients lose everything. Bernie borrows $30,000 from his father-in-law and quietly makes everyone whole. The documentary tells us this was the moment, the crossroads. He had a choice: become a failure or become a liar. It's a powerful frame. But before we accept it, let's slow down. Because while everyone in this episode seems captivated by the extraordinary, I kept noticing something else. Something so ordinary, almost nobody stopped to look at it. The absence of the ordinary is more revealing than the presence of the extraordinary. That one sentence unlocked the entire episode for me. Everybody notices the extraordinary returns. I noticed the absence of ordinary losses. Everybody notices the extraordinary reputation. I noticed the absence of ordinary skepticism. Everybody notices the extraordinary fraud. I noticed the absence of ordinary questions. Think about baseball for a moment. A home run isn't impossible. Neither are 2 home runs, or 3. But if somebody hits a home run every single time they step to the plate, year after year, season after season, the detective doesn't become fascinated by the home runs. The detective asks, where are the strikeouts? That's the clue, not the extraordinary, the absence of the ordinary. The documentary mentions investors receiving steady double-digit returns. Some describe returns reaching 15, 16, even 19%. Then another statement quietly slips by. We've never had a losing period. Now stop. Not because extraordinary returns are impossible, they're not. Home runs aren't impossible either. But a home run every single time you step to the plate, year after year, season after season. Now the absence of the ordinary becomes the clue. Where are the strikeouts? Where are the losses? Where are the years when the market simply didn't cooperate? Every legitimate business has ordinary ups and downs. Every investor has winning trades and losing trades. Every golfer misses putts. Every baseball player strikes out. Every business has slow months. So when someone tells me they never lose, I'm not immediately impressed. I'm immediately curious. Then comes one of the coldest moments in the entire episode. The SEC shuts down Avellino and Bienz. They order the firm closed. The investors receive every dollar back. Think about that for a moment. The exit door opens. Everybody gets their money back. The story could have ended right there. No one lost a dime at that moment. They could have thanked everyone, taken their money, walked away. invested somewhere else, or simply kept it. Instead, many of those same investors voluntarily walk right back through another door. They invest directly with Bernie Madoff. Now my question changes. Not why did Bernie take their money? Why did they still want to give it to him? That's the better question. Because whatever they believed Bernie represented had become more valuable than simply getting their money back. One investor says he sold his business for about $1 million. He invested $100,000 through Avellino and Bienes. When the SEC shut them down, he got every dollar back. Then he wired nearly $900,000 directly to Bernie Madoff. Think about that. That's not pocket change. That's not an impulsive decision. That's pushing nearly every chip into the center of the table. People don't do that lightly. So before I ask why Bernie accepted the money, I want to ask something else. What had to be believed before someone would risk almost everything? Because the risk didn't begin with Bernie. The belief came first. Whatever that $1 million meant, it wasn't enough. Something still seemed to be missing, and that's where the hunger enters the story. The fisherman doesn't create the hunger. The hunger comes before the bait ever touches the water. Without hungry fish, the bait has no audience. Without the belief that something more is needed, the promise loses its power. Everybody wants to investigate the bait. I want to investigate the hunger. And once I started looking at the hunger, little details that didn't seem important suddenly became impossible to ignore. One investor recalls people calling the office. "I've been told to call. I have $50,000 to invest." Think about that for a moment. I've been told to call. That may be one of the most revealing sentences in the entire episode. The investigation is already over. Somebody else's certainty has become my certainty. The referral replaced the question. Notice what's missing. The ordinary investigation, the ordinary skepticism, the ordinary hesitation that says, "Help me understand how this works." Instead, "I've been told to call." Then another investor says he did his due diligence. He had read about Bernie. He knew his reputation. The SEC had looked into him. Everything appeared legitimate. Again, notice what's missing. Not the extraordinary, the ordinary questions, the ordinary doubt, the ordinary willingness to say, "This sounds too good to be true." Then I started thinking about something else. Imagine you're at the country club, or the yacht club, or sitting around the dinner table with friends. Somebody asks how your investments are doing. You smile. "I'm with Bernie." The conversation changes immediately. "I know Bernie. I had lunch with Bernie the other day. He's managing my money." Do you see what just happened? The investment is no longer just an investment. It's become part of an identity. It's become something you can talk about, something you can quietly feel good about, something that says, "I'm in the room. I have access. I'm connected to somebody everybody else wishes they knew." Now go back to the moment when the SEC shuts everything down. They give everybody their money back. From the outside, that looks like relief. But what if it felt like loss? Not the loss of money, the loss of the story, the loss of being able to say, "I'm with Bernie." Maybe that's why so many people walked right back through the door, because people don't just protect their money, they protect the meaning they've given their money. They protect the identity built around it. And that's when another question came to me. Who did I become because I believed I was the kind of person who had access to Bernie Madoff? That's a very different question. Because now the story isn't about Bernie anymore. It's about me. It's about what I believed having access to him said about who I was. And once identity gets involved, ordinary questions often disappear. The absence of the ordinary becomes even easier to miss, and that's exactly where the story quietly turns. And that's when I realized something. Everybody in the documentary keeps asking the same question. Why did Bernie Madoff do it? Why did he lie? Why did he keep the scheme going? Those are fair questions. I just don't think they're the first questions. Because every one of those questions begins with Bernie. Mine begins somewhere else. What had to be believed before Bernie Madoff ever became believable? That's the question I couldn't let go of, because hunger always comes before the bait. Nobody goes to Chick-fil-A and then gets hungry. The hunger comes first. The fisherman doesn't create the hunger, he simply recognizes it. Without hungry fish, the bait has no audience. Without the belief that something more is needed, the promise loses its power. Bernie didn't invent the hunger, he found it. He recognized it. And once he recognized it, he knew exactly what to place on the hook. Then Bernie says something that almost everybody rushes past. He says one word: greed. Whether you agree with him or not isn't the point. Don't argue with the word just yet. Investigate it. What is greed? Is it simply wanting more money? Or does greed begin much earlier than that? Doesn't greed first require the belief that what I have isn't enough? Because if what I already have is enough, where does greed attach itself? It can't. The belief comes first. The behavior follows. One investor sold his business for about $1 million. He wasn't broke. He wasn't starving. He wasn't trying to survive another week. He already had more money than many people will ever see in a lifetime. Yet when he got his original investment back, he wired almost everything to Bernie Madoff. That's not a financial question anymore. That's an identity question. That's a belief question. What had to be believed before someone pushes nearly every chip into the center of the table? Because people don't do that lightly. Something had to seem more valuable than keeping what they already had. Something had to whisper, just a little more, just a little longer, just one more return. Then you'll have enough. But here's the question I kept asking myself while watching this episode. When is enough? Enough? Nobody ever seems able to answer that question. The separate self can't define enough because its entire identity is organized around not enough. Not enough money, not enough security, not enough success, not enough recognition, not enough tomorrow. So the search never ends. And maybe that's why this documentary stopped being about Wall Street for me. Because I wasn't just watching Bernie Madoff anymore. I was watching a mirror. A mirror asking one uncomfortable question. What belief am I carrying today that would make me vulnerable to the next Bernie Madoff? Whatever form that promise happens to take. Maybe that's why my attention never stayed on Bernie Madoff for very long. It kept returning somewhere else, to the ordinary things that never appeared. The ordinary losses, the ordinary questions, the ordinary skepticism, the ordinary contentment that quietly says, I already have enough. Because once the ordinary disappears, the extraordinary becomes much easier to believe. Maybe that's why this story has survived for so many years, not because it's only about Bernie Madoff, but because every generation produces another Bernie Madoff. The names change, the faces change, the industries change, the promises change, but the hunger keeps showing up. And wherever the hunger goes unnoticed, someone eventually learns how to feed it. That's why I don't think the first clue was Bernie Madoff. I think the first clue was much quieter than that. It was the absence of the ordinary. The ordinary questions that never got asked. The ordinary losses that never appeared. The ordinary investigation that never happened. The ordinary contentment that never arrived. Because sometimes, the absence of the ordinary is more revealing than the presence of the extraordinary. And if that's true, then maybe Bernie Madoff wasn't the beginning of the story. Maybe he was simply the answer to a question nobody realized they had already asked. Maybe the better question was never asked. But the story doesn't stop there. Because once Bernie Madoff's reputation begins spreading beyond Wall Street, something else begins to spread with it. Referrals, access, exclusivity. People begin whispering one name to another. Country clubs become recruiting grounds. Palm Beach becomes fertile soil. questions become fewer. Trust becomes currency. And without anyone ever saying it out loud, one unwritten rule quietly takes over the room. Don't ask. Don't tell.